Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrea Wolfleff, Director of Operations at the NCMC. Because of the way we have this set up tonight, I am just talking as a disembodied logo in the corner, but I'm here. So welcome to Nantucket Tempo, our regular series of music appreciation talks, interviews, and behind-the-scenes programs designed to help you develop your ear for enjoying and listening to music. Tonight, we welcome Nick Davies, who is bravely presenting our most risque talk of the series. Nick is a clarinetist, composer, freelance musician, and faculty member at the NCMC, where he teaches clarinet, recorder, and music composition. Later this fall, he'll be teaching a 5-part webinar series called Listen to This, The Beginner's Guide to 20th Century Classical Music. So keep your eyes out for that. Nicholas regularly performs with ensembles, including the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Roomful of Teeth, Santa Barbara Symphony, New World Symphony, and the Columbus, Indiana Philharmonic. As a soloist, he's performed with orchestras, including the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Antelope Valley Symphony, the Pro Art Chamber Orchestra, and the USC Wind Ensemble. Nick recently performed Frank Ticheli's Clarinet Concerto alongside the composer. As if that isn't enough, I keep wanting to call you Nicholas. Nick is the artistic director and founder of the Rossini Club, a chamber music organization based in Nantucket, which is hosting its 8th season this year. He holds a bachelor's in music from Rice University and a master's of music from the University of Southern California, where he studied with clarinetists Richie Hawley, Yehuda Gilad, I'm going to butcher that all the time, Gilad, and David Howard. Welcome, Nick.
Hello, everybody. So thank you again for that introduction, Andrea. I'm just going to get right to it. Tonight we'll be talking about Salome, Richard Strauss's rather incredible and very all over the place opera. So let's see, I'm just going to make sure you can see this. All right. So I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, why Salome in particular, and the answer for me is that it is a great example of music at a crossroads, a cultural crossroads, and it's a great way of sort of explaining how and why music and art change. I think that this opera in particular, and going forward into the 20th century, really asks the question of what is the purpose of art and what is the function of art. And this particular opera is a wonderful intersection of art, politics, literature, and music. And when I refer to art from here on out, unless I specify otherwise, I'll be referring to the visual arts. Another question would be why Femme Fatale? Salome, of course, is our titular Femme Fatale. And I think this is a particularly interesting archetype to sort of explore the difference between the psychological and the literal. The internal or the psychological becomes increasingly important as we head into the 20th century and the 21st century. I think of some of the other iconic Femme Fatale, the ones from Puccini, Carmen from Bizet's opera, Kundry from Wagner's Parsifal. And I think that in this way, this exploration of this psychology and these sort of, again, this intersectionality really foreshadows the future of art. So to get a little context for what's going on here is, let's talk a little bit about the history of fin de siècle Vienna. So we have two important aspects to discuss, the political and the cultural. First, during this time, both Austria and Germany were experiencing unprecedented growth and plenty, at the same time that there was also a pretty pendulum-like swing to the right. It was quite a conservative time. Austria, in particular, has always had a tenacious grip with liberalism. It's always sort of been a conservative country. It even is actually today. But this was especially true at that time. It is as probably many of you would expect, nationalism was on the rise as Germany, under Kaiser Wilhelm, was looking to expand its empire. And really, I think another thing to mention is that all of this was a huge backlash to the prior era. On the other hand, in the cultural landscape, in 1895, we see Freud and Breuer have just published their studies on hysteria, which serves as the base for the development of the psychoanalytical approach to treatment, psychoanalysis therapy. Again, exploring the layers of the conscious and the subconscious. I think that this is one of the things I really want you all to hold on to as we look towards Salome, because this is a key tenet of Strauss's score. Musically, there are two big things to note. First of all, Mahler, Gustav Mahler, one of Strauss's friends, he was most famous in his day for being a conductor, today's as a symphonist. He is known for these huge, expansive, hour-plus long symphonies that are drawn up in an epic scale. There's really no other way to put it, but he attempts to sort of communicate a world, to use his words. And then on the other hand, you have what we call the Brahms-Wagner polemic. Of course, Johannes Brahms and Richard Wagner, the two foremost German composers of the latter half of the 19th century. Brahms, the conservative, who wrote music that he sort of thought as pure music that didn't have to necessarily do with anything outside, anything that was extra musical. Whereas Wagner was a deeply nationalist composer, especially in his Ring cycle, the four Ring operas, which is really about the German consciousness, the sense of German identity, where his music was very clearly about something. And then I think the other thing I want to hold on to as we move forward is the Vienna Secession, the artistic movement from 1897. Gustav Klimt, of course, was the most notable figure from this movement, associated with symbolism and Art Nouveau. So let's pause for a moment on the artistic side of things, because this is going to be the most helpful analog when we explore how to understand Salome, and you'll see why in a second. So here we have 4 portraits, 2 of which are of Salome, and one is a biblical figure, the Klimt, and the Sheila is just it's a portrait of one of his models. But we'll get into this in a second. So the leftmost, we have Jean Benner's Salome from 1899. He's a French symbolist painter, best known as a portraitist. And as you can see, he shows a lot of influence from John Singer Sargent. They actually worked together in an artist colony. And I think the thing that is most notable about this particular rendering is Salome's passivity, the sort of matter-of-fact way that she presents us with the head of John the Baptist. It's not as sexualized as the latter 3 are, but still you certainly get a sense of her implied, maybe oblique power. The next we have Judith und Holofernes, just in English, Judith and Holofernes, the subject of Judith the Triumphant with the head of Nebuchadnezzar's general. Of course, an Austrian symbolist painter, and you can see here his very evident interest in gold and a gilded palette. We'll talk more about the Klimt because it, again, is the most analogous to Salome. The character of Judith in this portrait is the most analogous to Salome herself. And then the third is Gustave Adolphe Mossa, who some of you may not recognize. He was a French symbolist. Again, this painting actually is from 1908. So we've skipped ahead a little bit, but not too far. His paintings were mostly political satire, especially critical of this idea of the new woman being the modernized, liberated, woman, one who can vote, so on and so forth. And in fact, in the modern era, we would most certainly consider his art by and large quite misogynistic. But you can see here the sort of mix between decadence and gore, and this sort of violent event that is it's kind of passe. I don't know. It's sort of it just is. It's right at the forefront, but it's not necessarily what we draw attention to. And finally, we have one of the first Austrian expressionist painters, Egon Schiele, with his black-haired maiden. And what immediately is evident, of course, is the pretty frank eroticism of the painting, the grotesque way in which she is drawn, which in certain ways is meant to imply sort of the internal rather than the external. It's an interesting combination of the two. And of course, if you look from left to right, you'll see a very clear progression from just a span of 10 years, what changes in art. And this change can also be seen in music. Now let's go right to the Klimt. So again, this is Judith und Holofernes. I'd like to talk very specifically about her character, because Klimt here goes against convention of the portrayal of this particular biblical character. Judith is usually most known for her portrayals as a victorious, almost militant stature. She's usually holding the head of Holofernes. There's a lot of gore. There's a lot of triumph. It's usually sort of these outdoor scenes. But instead, we have what is very clearly a suggestion of the triumph of female eroticism over male aggression. You'll see that Holofernes' head is pushed almost completely out of the portrait, as if quite clearly to de-emphasize his importance. It really focuses on the woman. She is, you can see obviously her complete torso, and I think most notable is her expression, this sort of perverse and prideful, flirtatious look. And of course, it's really hard to escape the over-the-top gold leaf and gilded appearance of the whole thing. And again, this character, I feel strongly is the best representation of Salome herself in an artistic format. So keeping that in mind, let's go on and talk about the music. So first, Richard Strauss is probably, along with Mahler, one of the most important late Romantic composers, I should add, and Wagner. He was born in Munich in Bavaria. He was the son of Franz Strauss, who was the principal French horn player of the court orchestra in the area. And I should add, a very conservative musician. So this would be to say that he erred on the side of the Brahms side of the polemic, of the Brahms-Wagner polemic. However, even though Strauss's music in the early period sounded like Schumann, Mendelssohn, he first saw his first Wagner operas when he was, 10 to 20, and this had a profound effect on his output. In 1885, he was appointed the conductor of the Meiningen Court Orchestra, and this would be the first of many successes in his life. This sort of started his entire career as a notable conductor. He actually worked with Brahms. He worked with Mahler. Certainly, they were, as I think I mentioned this, they were friends. And he began to also get his music played. And aside from opera, Strauss's most famous output is a type of music we call tone poems. Best way of explaining this is descriptive or programmatic music, in which the music tries to literally describe a story. He has a Don Quixote, a 40-minute tone poem. He also has, of course, there's the Also sprach Zarathustra, the Thus Spake Zarathustra, which many of you will probably be familiar with, that tries to cover this essay by Nietzsche. But the 1889 Don Juan premiere, which is the same legend feminizing brigand, whatever you want to call them, that Mozart makes use of in Don Giovanni. And this was a huge success for him. Interestingly, though, his first opera, Guntram, which takes medieval subject matter similar to Wagner, is just a complete failure. His next opera, of course, Salome, was quite successful. But let's move on to the origins of Salome, the character, and of the play that inspired Strauss. So Salome is actually not originally mentioned in the Bible. She's simply referred to as Herodias's daughter. And it appears that Isidore of Pelusium, the Alexandrian ascetic from the 5th century, combined the character of Herodias's daughter with the legend of a Roman consul who executed a prisoner for the spectacle of his catamite enjoyment, a catamite being a young male prostitute. So just for a quick plot outline for the story of Salome, it's set in 100 Common Era, ancient Judea. Salome, the stepdaughter of the Tetrarch Herod, a tetrarch being one of the 4 rulers of Judea, lives a life under his lecherous eye. He holds prisoner John the Baptist, with whom she becomes infatuated, and he actually refuses her advances. Distraught, Salome actually tricks Herod into swearing an oath to her by promising to dance for him. And what ultimately happens is that to fulfill his oath, she forces him to execute John the Baptist and present her with the head. United at last, Salome kisses the head of John the Baptist as Herod orders her execution. Fun story. So this would inspire many, many works of art, literary, musical, artistic, but one of the most notable is Oscar Wilde's Salome from 1891. This was originally in French, later translated into English, and it was influenced by Flaubert's Herodias from 3 Tales from 1877. There are a number of other French pieces of literature that he was also influenced by, including Mallarmé. But what's interesting, of course, is that there's another Salome opera close to Strauss's, which is the 1881 Massenet opera inspired by Flaubert. And what is notable about Wilde's interpretation of Salome is the focus on the decadence, on the incestuous relationship between stepfather and stepdaughter, which is to say Herod and Salome, the conflict of the Jewish and Christian religions, and the relationship between Yochanan and Salome. Now, Yochanan is an archaic word that Wilde uses in place of John the Baptist. So from here on out, we're going to refer to John the Baptist exclusively as Yochanan. And it was in 1903 that Hedvig Lachmann's translation of Salome was shown in Max Reinhardt's Kleines Theater, and this is where Strauss first saw the opera, rather the play, and he was immediately completely enamored with it and decided, I have to turn this into an opera. So the premiere was what we call a succès de scandale, as actually a number of very important artistic works were at the turn of the century, most notably the Rite of Spring, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which resulted in a riot. But the funny thing about many of these succès de scandale, of course, is that they are extremely, extremely successful and wildly popular. And the Dresden premiere, what followed was immediate protest for the immoral content that it contained. You know, of course, there's the clear blasphemy of the political portrayals, but of course, it's hard to overlook the necrophilia, the homosexuality, the incest, and just generally speaking, the erotic. It's not even overtone. It's right there in front of everyone, and that it was so offensive to many viewers and many governments, and it was actually banned in a number of countries, a number of cities. of course, including Austria, England, and the United States. The Met premiere shut down after one night. So let's see. I was going to talk about a little bit about the score and the music. You see here Marie Wittich, who was the original Salome. In this costume, she is actually, I believe, who is she? Brunhilde, that's right, from Wagner's Ring. She was a very famous Wagnerian soprano, which this role calls for. And what's interesting about Salome's role is that she is a young woman in the play. She's a 16-year-old, 15-year-old girl, yet the voice that is called for, that Strauss uses, is just a wildly difficult role that calls for someone much older in their career. So balancing this line between a young person who can, a young-looking person who can really sing the role is quite difficult. And on top of that, there's quite a significant dancing portion to the role, which many singers actually refuse outright to do. So going back to the libretto, again, it's the translation by Hedwig Lachmann, word for word, that Strauss originally saw. The main characters are Herod, Tetrarch of Judea, Herodias, his wife, Salome, Yochanan, and then there's one other important character for the first half of the opera, Narabot, the captain of the guard. I should explain one thing about the family. Herod is the brother of Herodias's original husband, so hence the stepfather relationship between Salome and Herod. Now, going back to the artistic analogy we were using, we were talking a lot about gilded paintings before. Now, if there's ever a gilded orchestra, it would be the ones that Strauss uses. You can see he has an absolutely colossal orchestra that he uses for this work. Having played this opera before, I can tell you it is a cramped pit. And I would think of it in terms of why he uses this huge orchestra. He uses the color. He uses these large subdivisions of the orchestra. Suddenly, you don't just have two clarinets. You have four clarinets, a bass clarinet, and an E-flat clarinet, an E-flat clarinet being the piccolo clarinet. You have an entire organ stop worth of clarinets. And it lends itself to this incredible color range that you now can use, which he uses to enormous effect. So let's talk about the musical structure. There are two incredibly important components of Strauss's opera, which is the use of leitmotif and tonality. So leitmotif was first used by Wagner, and essentially what it is, it's you can think of it like a theme song, a recurrent musical theme that is identified with a person, place, or idea. And the way that Strauss uses this is in juxtaposition or combination with one another to suggest a plot. So to give you an idea of this, we're going to play three motifs from this, three of the leitmotifs. Salome's, Yochanan's, and what we're sort of loosely calling a love motif. So I'm going to pull over to our recording of Salome from the Metropolitan Opera. So we're going to hear it in the clarinet. It's going to be very quick. And that is the Salome leitmotif. So I'll play it for you again in case you missed it. It goes by very, very quickly. And believe it or not, that forms almost the entire opera in and of itself. The next one we're going to be showing you is the Yochanan's leitmotif. For this time, we're going to hear it in the winds as a melody. And for good measure, I'm going to play the first half of that again. It's obviously quite a long motif, so just for the sake of time, I'll play the first part, which is the most significant. And the final one I'm going to show for you is the love motif. I said earlier that it's kind of a loose definition because it's interesting how Strauss actually develops this motif at first to sort of indicate an innocence, and at the end, in the middle rather, to denote a sort of evil insistence, and finally by the end it becomes this ecstatic emotion. So first I'm going to show you its introduction, which you will hear in the clarinet, and Salome will sing over the top of it. It'll sound rather similar. And I'm sure you can see here why he chooses to put this love motif right here. It's the first time that Salome lays eyes upon Yochanan. So again, I'm just going to show you that quick motif. Now, I've said that you can use these motifs in combination with one another or juxtaposed with one another to create a plot. So we're going to skip right ahead for a second to the part where Yochanan rejects Salome, and you'll hear at the very beginning in the brass, very loud, you'll hear this the Yochanan's motif followed by Salome's love motif, which is very clearly in some sort of turmoil in the rest of the orchestra. It'll go right back and forth. And as you'll see, it's quite a powerful piece of music, this orchestral interlude. So I'm sure we all got a taste of what that's like when he sort of takes these small ideas and changes them completely. Two other quick notes before we go on to the next subject, which is to mention that Strauss uses what we call text painting, which is a way of saying that he describes music literally for what is happening in the text. And this is related to this leitmotific idea. So for instance, when he says that lions will roar, you'll hear roaring in the orchestra, or when he says there are birds, you'll hear the fluttering of the birds. I think one of my favorite little moments is when she refers to his lips as being as red as the wine that the Grecians stomped beneath their feet. And in the orchestra, you hear this thumping of a drum. The other thing to notice is the central importance of the Dance of the Seven Veils. I alluded to this before, but it is essentially a 10-minute gap of no singing where Salome dances for King Herod to seduce him in order to allow her to execute Yochanan. And it is sort of a tone poem in and of itself, in that it takes all the musical ideas from the entire opera and boils it down to this 10-minute piece of music, which is actually quite often played in the orchestra hall, let us say, not an opera, independent of the opera itself. It's also notable to say that this is the fulcrum of the opera. It's where Salome goes from being powerless to being powerful. Now, at this point in time, I'd actually like to open up the floor for questions regarding this leitmotivic structure, because I know it can be a little complicated, and I'd like to take some questions if anybody has any. I think you can raise your hand. Let's see.
Unmute.
There we go. Oh, has to. There we go. Should work now. There we go. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. I'm curious. After his time, has this translated and continued in more modern operas?
You mean the leitmotivic structure?
Yes.
So certainly Strauss continued to use it. His next opera, Electra, uses a leitmotivic structure. Berg's opera Wozzeck also uses a leitmotivic structure, I believe, as his opera Lulu does. But yeah, it has gone out of fashion nowadays. But yes, it is a form of structure that was used for a very long time.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. If there are no other questions, I will continue explaining. Let's see. So now, oh, hold on. I just realized you probably can't see it, can you? You need me to share. Okay, hope you can all see that. Yeah, okay. So the next thing is this idea of tonality as a portrait, which is to say that Strauss uses different types of harmonic areas to portray the psychology of the characters as opposed to emphasizing the plot. So he's emphasizing the internal struggle that is going on over the physical actions. This is something that Wagner did, but I think that Strauss really took to a new level. Now, how does he do this? The first way is, of course, with these sort of three areas that he uses: the chromatic, the tonal, and what we're going to call whole tone. And we're going to listen to an example of the tonal first. Now, the way that Strauss portrays Yochanan is through a tonal language. What this is going to sound like is like we start in a very sort of a foreign land, and we're going to travel from this place to a destination that is very, very, very clear. It's what a lot of us refer to as consonant or clear music. So I'm going to give you a little example of what this sounds like at his first entrance. And there's going to be, okay, that's just the one example.
Wo ist dessen Sündenbecher jetzt voll ist? Wo ist der eines Tages im Angesicht alles Volkes in einem Silbermantel sterben wird? Heiß bin herkommen, auf das nicht in Bedessen höre, der in der Wüste und in den Häusern der
So two things I hope you noticed. I hope you noticed the very clear directionality that when we got to that final cadence, that final harmony, it was consonant, it was joyous, it was where we had been waiting for the whole time, but we arrived, even though it took us a little while. I hope maybe some of you noticed too that Yokanan's theme was present there in the trumpet at the final couple of seconds there. Now, what happens if we change this a little bit? What if we, say, use a whole tone scale, which is to say sort of a off-kilter scale? It doesn't sound like it has a tonal base. It doesn't sound like it clearly lands somewhere like that last one did. So this is the harmonic area that is used to describe Herod, who is he's kind of a hypochondriac. He's constantly concerned about various omens. He's not only is he sort of a lecherous person, but he's kind of he worries about everything. So let's hear what that sounds like at first when he's first introduced.
Salome, wo ist die Prinzessin? Warum kam sie nicht wieder zum Erkennen? Ist sie noch so hatte?
So it's most present in those running notes that go down, those scalar notes. But now let's hear it in a context where he's actually been defeated, where he finally gives into Salome. We're going to hear these scales, these whole tone scales in the brass.
Soll ihr geben, was sie verlangt. Sie ist Wahrheit, ihre Mutter, Kind.
So this fretting about has become instead sort of a manic thing there. And it's interesting, you can see how instead of a melodic figure being a leitmotif, he's actually now using harmony as a leitmotif. And the final character to use this is, of course, Salome, who uses what we call a chromatic harmony, which is to say the key area, unlike Herod's, which never settles, or Yokanan's, which is very clear, Salome's is sort of all over the place. You're not really sure where it's going to go. And this is great at portraying the kind of flirtatious person she is, as in scene 1, or rather scene 2. So this sort of unclear harmony is one of the most notable things. And from this flirtatiousness that we see at first, we'll see that it very quickly becomes quite dark. In this particular excerpt, you'll also hear Salome's theme in the high strings, if you can catch it. So now, if this is the idea, like what's the purpose of this idea? And I kind of alluded to it a little bit before, but this suggests different characteristics in each of our main characters. Of course, these sort of do good prophet, the very Christian, holier than thou character of Yochanan, Salome, this flirtatious teenager, and Herod, of course, this, as I've said before, sort of this wishy-washy character. And the most interesting way that he uses this is by unifying Salome and Yochanan at the end when she finally kisses his head. What he does here is what we call bitonality, which say that he combines two different keys in one place, and it has an incredible effect, which will sound something like this. And for those of you who may have missed it, it happens for just a brief second, or rather, it's a couple seconds that chord is held and it disappears. So I'll just play it one more time just in case. Jeez. So again, I'm going to take this moment to open the floor up for questions. As again, I understand that is maybe a complicated thing to understand. Let's see. Any questions from the audience about any of that material? All right, then let's continue. So the question, of course, here is, what does Salome represent? And there's a couple ways to think of this. First of all, there's of course the question of tonality, which we have explored. This idea of Salome being the atonal and the chromatic, those sort of dissonant harmonies, as opposed to Gyokanon, the consonant and the sort of clear cut. So those are the two, that's the conflict, that's the musical conflict, are these two opposing styles of music. In addition, we have the religious aspect, which is, here's something interesting, of course, is that Yokanon is a representation of Christianity, of the music of the future, whereas Salome is the religion of the past. And of course, Salome is the music of the future, and Yokanon is the music of the past. So there seems to be some sort of implication. I do not claim that Strauss intended it this way, but there is sort of this implication that that the future of music, or at least what this piece of music represents, is the obliteration of new and old together. And of course, another thing that this is sort of an obvious thing to say, but there's a very clear conflict in the fact that she is looking for love in death. I mean, this is not an unprecedented trope, but, you know, cutting off somebody's head is another way of showing it. So the other thing that she and the opera represent is the decay of society, which I think is especially present in the Gustav Adolf Moser painting from before, just to be clear which one I'm speaking of, the one on the third to left. And Salome is sort of posed as a threat to Christianity. She's an affirmation of the earthly pleasures that are in opposition to the divine heaven that Yokanon offers. And it is also, of course, interesting to note that necrophilia is the ultimate iteration that Wilde or Strauss or these people see as the affirmation of earthly pleasure, and it is, of course, ultimately her downfall. And you could take this and you could see it as a metaphor for the opera. You could see it as a metaphor for music. You could see it as a metaphor for Viennese and German society. But it is, of course, pretty notable to say that regardless, it certainly does happen when World War I begins, and that aristocratic society is sort of quashed. It's also notable to say that, again, similar to the Klimt, there is an obsession on Salome's part with virginity and with purity, and that she sees this in Yokanon as this. She talks about him as a pure white statue, a pillar of marble. She is sort of entranced by his bizarre prophetic utterances. And ultimately, she actually destroys him. She destroys this concept of masculinity. She destroys Herod, too, and she manages to gain control. And ultimately, this all comes down to the fact that Salome was faced with a choice. And this is what she ultimately chose. And again, it's hard to say how much Strauss intended for this to be, but I think that this is a particularly interesting way of looking at music and understanding music. And my goal in this seminar and in all future seminars, which of course is Andrea mentioned, I'm going to be giving another one on contemporary music, 20th century music. I'm hoping that this way of looking at music and understanding music helps us appreciate better what it's trying to communicate. So for the last part of my seminar, I just would like to show you the final 5 minutes of the opera, what we call the Schlussgesang, which just in German means closing song.
as pipe.
So there you have it. I have a bunch of resources here for all of you to check out. I definitely recommend all of them, considering I put them all here. But the Salome 1975, I should mention, is on YouTube, and I would go and view it right now if you enjoyed what you heard and enjoyed what you saw. The 1962 recording of Birgit Nilsson with Schulte and the Vienna Phil is a wonderful recording. She is probably the most, the best known Salome. And of course, these three books, Alex Ross's The Rest is Noise, which the first chapter deals with this question that we've been grappling with. Fantasy at Vienna, again, seems kind of relevant. And the Wilde original play, which is a fascinating play of its own right. So at this point, I think we're going to open it up to questions. And if you want any of those resources, of course, you are welcome to. You can probably can they email you? Can they email you, Andrea, if they want those materials?
Oh, absolutely.
Great. No questions? Everybody got it 100%. That's great.
It was fascinating. Now I want to learn about the other femme fatales in German opera.
Yeah. Yes. Well, there's some good ones. There's the oh, we have a Q&A. Is that a oh, what's it like to perform? Yes. Let's see. Answer live. Performing it, I have to say, I think it's got to be one of the most difficult pieces of music that I've ever played. And I mean, I've played a lot of, I think I've played a lot of hard stuff, and it's simply because it does not stop going. It is just, it's very technically demanding. It's almost constantly exposed. And it's really hard to hear when the orchestra is that big. You have to play in tune, you have to play in time. And also the sheer amount of concentration it takes to play an opera is quite, it's taxing, even though it's actually a shorter opera. It's about 1 hour and 40 minutes. It's really taxing. Just imagine playing a Wagner opera, which is 5 hours. I also should mention that the last 5 minutes, there's the whole woodwind section is just trilling, playing 2 rapid notes in succession. That just alone, at the end of an opera, very, very, very tiring. It's easy to screw that up.
That's it. I guess no one has any further questions.
No.
Nick, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everybody for coming and delving deep into this wonderful opera. Please, I definitely encourage you all to go see it as soon as you can. I've watched it probably like 10 times over the last several weeks that I've been preparing this, and it hasn't gotten old once. I promise.
Our next Nantucket Tempo talk is in 2 weeks, the 28th, I believe, the last Tuesday in August. And Greta Feeney will be back to talk about the plague and the Renaissance that arose after. So it's a timely discussion on how art can be informed by, I guess, catastrophe. So we hope to see you all then. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.